I'll never forget that night. It was last year and I had just turned 25. I had been to a friend's wedding in another state and was returning by train. I reached the station around 5 a.m. It was freezing as the temperature had hit 4 degrees, and all I could think about was getting home fast so I could sleep for hours after being tired from many nights. I generally avoided traveling alone in dark, but it was impossible to wait at the station until sunrise because 1 hour seemed like a very long time, so I decided to get a taxi. The distance from the station to my apartment is roughly 40 kilometers. There were 2 taxis and I got into one of them, without making any eye contact with the driver. I told him where I wanted to go and we started. This man must have been in his late 50s or early 60s. He had silver gray hair with a big build. I decided to go with this taxi because I thought I would be more safe with this fellow since he was elderly. Boy, it was a big mistake. Nearly 15 to 20 minutes had passed and I was looking at the road ahead. There were very few cars and all I could see were trees that were close by and fog covered everything else. Suddenly, I noticed that this guy had been staring at me from the rearview mirror and he didn't blink or look away when I looked at him. It had been over 2 minutes and he was still staring. He had scary, droopy eyes. I was very uncomfortable at this point, so I used my scarf to cover half my face, which was only covering my neck all this while. But this didn't stop him, and he suddenly started laughing like a maniac. And then he said a word in some other language I believe that I couldn't understand, so I asked him to repeat. My heart was beating very fast. "So many people are dying," he said, and he started laughing again. I was too afraid to ask him any questions, but I stood there frozen, regretting why I didn't wait at the station. My hands were shivering because I was trying to send a message to a friend, but my fingers just couldn't type properly. He turned around, now facing me, asking me if I was married. I managed to speak nervously no, and he said, "You will repent." With these words, he started to speed up. My mind was going crazy now. What the heck did he mean by that? Why would he say such a thing to me? I tried looking around if it was a good idea to get off that taxi, but it was still very dark and there weren't many cars around. Maybe 2 or 3 cars would pass every 10 minutes. By this point, I was pretty convinced that he was taking me to some other place. Maybe he wasn't, but I was too terrified to think straight. I was trembling with fear and I was sure he was going to attack me or do something worse. Suddenly, he slowed down and he seemed to be talking to himself. "People die, you'll die, she'll die," pointing to the empty seat. With those words, he stopped the taxi right there and asked me to get down, saying, "We need fresh air and the petrol is over." He wasn't drunk, but he had been hallucinating since he kept blabbering, looking at the empty seat and was laughing for no reason. Arguing with him could make him annoyed, so I decided to do as he said, until I got some help or maybe I could stop him in some way by agreeing to all his demands. I got off the taxi and this guy got off too. Now he was right in front of me, but at a car-length distance, holding a lit torch, pointing it on his neck and repeating, "You will repent." I was almost crying due to fear, but running was impossible because I could have been run over by some car due to the fog, and my mind was not working properly by this point. The thoughts of calling someone didn't occur to me earlier, and now it was too risky since this maniac was standing right there, holding that torch, and moving his head like some possessed person. It felt like a scene from a horror movie, and his eyes appeared bigger than normal due to the torchlight that illuminated his creepy, now serious face. He said something again which I didn't understand. I was sure that he was going to charge me or continue to mess with me before that. I was extremely restless and looking around for help. To my relief, there was a car passing by and it stopped there looking at us, just standing in the middle of the road. The guy came running to me and asked me to go towards his car, where his daughter, who was nearly my age, opened the door. The insane cab driver ran back to his taxi and drove off in seconds. Clearly, there was enough petrol. I was still breathing heavily and told them that what had happened in the last 30 or 40 minutes. They told me that I was in the opposite direction and it was not a safe area, since many incidents with girls had happened there already. I was right. The driver had taken me to some other place. They had sensed something was wrong by the way that maniac stood there holding the torch, and that light showed my silhouette more clearly, so they decided to check on what was going on. Had they not stopped, I wouldn't be alive to narrate this incident. Since that night, I never travel alone at night. Never ever. I'm thankful to those people who saved my life. Sometimes we see many people who say they need help, but we fear that it could be a trap and we don't stop. Had they thought the same, I would be dead. I am currently living in the Middle East. One night, I decided to go mall strolling and watch movies with a friend of mine. We stayed there for quite a few hours and didn't realize that it was already late. We had parted ways and she went home first and I was still waiting for the cab that I had booked. When the driver came, he was perfectly fine, nothing sketchy. Or so I thought. He was just quite annoying. He was asking too much, questions upon questions. What was my name, where I originally came from, how long was I staying abroad, where and what was my work, if I had kids or a significant other. It felt inappropriate, so I refused to answer some of his questions. I just nervous laughed to signal that I was getting uncomfortable, but he still kept throwing me questions. I didn't have the heart to tell him to stop asking or to let him know that it was making me feel uncomfortable, so I messaged my friend to call me. We have this safe word we say to each other if we need help exiting from a horrible person, a conversation, or a situation, and so she called. We were talking already, but he was still murmuring some things. A few seconds later, he turned the radio up and the volume up, loud enough for me to barely understand my friend. This is where I kind of got really scared. And then he started holding my other hand, like that scene from Titanic when Jack was intertwining his hands with roses. A scene that I wished I would get to experience too, but not in a situation like that. And then my mind suddenly shut down. I froze and didn't know what to do. And then I suddenly heard my friend's voice, still on the line, screaming, "Are you still alive?" I came to my senses and shouted, "Let me down." He said no. I told him that I was going to call the police on him if he didn't. And so he stopped and dropped me off somewhere still far from my home, at freaking 12 a.m. I called my sister to come pick me up. She came, and when we got home, I was so thankful that I was alive. For 1 second, I thought that that might be the end of me. This happened this past May. I live in a 2-bedroom apartment. The complex has no security guards whatsoever, with one other roommate. We'll call the roommate Emily. It's also important to know that a lot of people will ask Emily if we're twins. We look very similar. She and I both spend almost every night at our boyfriend's house and are rarely home. One night around 8:45 p.m., I was home cleaning before I left to go to my boyfriend's house. I ran to get something from my car and came back into my apartment, locking the door behind me. 5 minutes after, I hear a knock at my door. I'm already a paranoid person, so I get a little scared. I knew that it wasn't Emily because she would have called to tell me she forgot her key. I tried to ignore it, and then a second knock. These also weren't innocent knocks. They sounded like a police officer knock. Immediately after the second knock, I FaceTime my boyfriend. He's convincing me to take a look through the peephole. I take a look and no one is there. I say, "Okay, I'm going to pack my stuff and then come over." I take 2 steps back from the peephole, and then again, I hear banging on the door. Even my boyfriend's face dropped on the phone. I ran and locked myself in the bathroom crying. I didn't get out of there until my boyfriend got there to get me, and when he did, no one was at my door. The next day, my boyfriend and I stopped at my apartment so I could change and get ready for a Cinco de Mayo gathering. There were no knocks that day. The day after I got home, Emily was out getting kitty litter and was going to meet me at the apartment since we were both too scared to be there alone. I get home and I was sitting on my phone scrolling through TikTok. About 10 minutes into the scrolling, I hear that same knock. I look through my people and call Emily and describe to her what the guy looked like. She had no idea who it could be. I then watched him walk away and thought maybe that he would stop. Another 5 minutes passed and he was back knocking. I FaceTime Emily again and she tells me to open the door. Don't ever do this. I opened the door and the guy was a bit muscular, looked a little bit older than me, I'm 23, and was someone who I had never seen around my apartment complex before. He seemed shook that I answered. The conversation was, "Oh, is this a bad time?" "Yes." "I was just wondering, do you have a printer?" "No." "Oh, okay." And then he walked away slowly. I also thought it was weird that someone was asking for a printer, being that all classes were moved to online format, and we were supposed to be in quarantine. And also, if you needed a printer that bad and someone doesn't answer the first knock, why would you keep trying? Especially when you don't even know the person. We told a bunch of people about the knocking in our complex, and one other apartment said that they had been having the same issues. They were also 2 girls living alone. The next day came and Emily went back with her boyfriend. As she was leaving the apartment, she heard from a balcony next to ours. "Yo, is that her?" She turned around and 2 men ran back inside. We told the apartment complex and called the police. They said they can't really do anything unless the guy is present at our door knocking. After that, we installed a motion detection camera and put up a sign on our window. "We have cameras and you're being recorded." Since then, Emily has moved out. I have 2 new male roommates who are seen coming in and out of the apartment, and no one has came and knocked since. This story happened when I was 15 and totally reckless. I was with my best friend Alice and her neighbor Emily. We decided to try and enter clubs with our fake IDs after discreetly going out of the house by the window. After getting rejected by the security guards at the clubs because obviously we were not looking like 18+ girls, we were wandering the streets not knowing what to do. It was around 1 a.m. and the subway was closed, and we didn't have enough money to get a cab. Plus, we really wanted to party. And Alice wanted to find a new guy because she was heartbroken from her past boyfriend. The last club we tried to enter into was in one of the areas that had a famous bad reputation in the city. It was in Lyon, France. Suddenly, a car stops next to us. The door opens and there are 3 guys inside. 2 of them turn their head and tell us, "Hey, pretty girls, come with us. We have everything you need to get some pleasure. We have some drinks and we can smoke, come." The one at the back looked really muscular and was really insistent. Alice then said, "Let's go, girls, it could be super fun." Then she whispered, "Please, I need some fun, I need a guy to turn the page." She grabbed Emily's arm and went into the car laughing. At this point, I was like, what the heck am I doing? Well, I would rather die with my friends than die alone in the streets, and we all entered the car. In the car, they're trying to flirt with us, but I'm petrified. We say that we're 17 and they tell us that it's the perfect age to party with them. After 15 minutes of them driving to I don't know where, around the city, they say that they want to get some drinks, and that they want to find a cool place. Alice is super happy. Emily and I are relieved that they're going to drop us in a public place like a bar or a club, but they park the car in a car park in the middle of nowhere. They get out of the car and the guys take some bottles from the trunk, mix a lot of stuff inside the glasses and then give them to us. The one who was driving stays in the car, hands on the wheel, not saying anything. The two other guys start to tell us really inappropriate things, that they're gonna take us to a hotel and that we all looked like we had experience. They were around 35 and we were all 15. They insisted on saying how they would be the best hit of our lives, how they would be in beds, etc. Emily whispers to me that we shouldn't drink, but act as if we're all drinking because there might be something inside of it. Alice starts flirting back and tells them that it's kind of dangerous, but she likes it. At this point, they tell that they're never going to let us go unless we stay with them the whole night. I feel trapped and they ask me to drink insistently. I finally do it and I start to feel dizzy really fast. Everything is blurry around me. I think in a very incoherent way and my stomach hurts. The guys are looking at me as if I was a prey and they were hunting. About 10 to 15 minutes of feeling like this, I tell Alice that we should go and she doesn't look worried at all. I then think that I should sit inside the car, waiting for my fate to do its job. I open the front door and there's still the guy who drove inside. He is listening to the radio and doesn't even look at me when I enter. I asked him, "Why aren't you with your friends?" He turns to me upset and says, "Hey, I don't know who you are and I don't want to know. You told us you were 17, but you look like my younger sister and she just got into high school. I don't know why my stupid friends are stupidly flirting with you, but I'm just waiting for them to stop and drop the three of you in a public place. Once it'll be done, I hope I'll never have to see you again in my entire life." I was shocked and relieved. We stayed there, the both of us, just listening to the radio, and hearing the laughs of Alice to the bad sexual jokes of the muscular guy. I was so dizzy, I was melting into my seat. After maybe 30 minutes, the driver said he wanted to go somewhere, and everybody got into the car. We sat in there and went for about a 10-minute ride, while the two guys were saying what they would do to us once we got to the hotel. The driving guy told them to shut up, and that he was dropping us off in a big place with lots of people. We gave the two guys some fake names for Facebook, some fake phone numbers, and we finally got out of the car. The muscular guy who was in the back tried to grab Emily's arm, but she managed to run outside and get away. They left. The driver looked at me just before and he nodded at me. I was still super dizzy and eventually I threw everything up that I had consumed. Emily didn't believe what had just happened, and Alice was still laughing, saying that was insane. It was like 3:30 or 4 in the morning, and we finally found a real party after that. But to these two guys that wanted to do I don't know what in a hotel, I'm glad that night didn't continue. Or, like the driving guy said, I hope I'll never ever see you again in my entire life. One summer night when I was around 5 years old, my sister and I awoke to hear something through our open bedroom window. My parents were yelling loudly on the back patio. This was not a common occurrence, and when they did fight, it was not typically anywhere that there is a chance of us hearing. But this sort of thing did happen from time to time, and though the situation was mildly unusual, we shrugged it off, shut the window and went back to sleep. We promptly forgot about the ordeal. It wasn't until years later we learned the truth about the yelling. As a near adult, I overheard my mother explaining the situation to a family member in another room. I'm a little fuzzy in the details as this all occurred a long time ago, but this is the gist of it. Apparently, at some point in the night, after my sister and I went to bed, my parents received an unusual phone call from someone using an electronic interpreter. Basically the same type of technology a person who is deaf might use to make calls and communicate over the phone. Understandably, my parents were a little surprised because we didn't know anyone who would use this service to contact us. But either way, they had accepted the phone call. I'm not sure how the person on the other line introduced themselves, or if they even did at all, but they knew the full names of everyone in my family, which was immediately very creepy and alarming. The conversation began to escalate as the person on the other end of the phone very specifically explained what our house looked like and told my parents that they were hiding somewhere in our backyard, which was large, dark, and full of all kinds of plants and trees that made it hard to clearly see. There were too many places to look, and at this point, the tormentor made it clear that they had intentions of entering our home and dismembering my sister and I. At this point, understandably, they were beginning to become frantic. There was a chance that nobody was out there and that this was all just some kind of cruel joke, but that notion was not worth the risk of believing. My dad asked if they were really where they said they were, and what were my parents doing at that very moment, and what were they wearing and stuff like that. This infection of a human on the other end of the line explained exactly what my father was doing, which was waving his middle finger in the air. Exactly what they were wearing, where certain things on our patio were placed. The expression on my mom's face, every detail. My dad, a rough guy with a heart of gold, charged into the night, ready to kill any person he encountered. Neither of my parents had cell phones. I don't think they were even a thing at this time. So my mom took the phone, which had finally been put down by my dad, and called the police. As brave and stupid as my dad was for venturing into the dark that night, he found nothing, and when the cops showed up soon after, they found nothing too. And the police were not able to trace the call because of the electronic interpreter, which they said was a common device used by people trying to anonymously harass others over the phone. Nothing ever came of this incident, and as I said, I was not told about it until at least a decade after it had happened. Was this the work of a former friend or enemy trying to play some kind of cruel joke? Was there an actual threat in my backyard? We will never know.